Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shellie Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy.
This is episode number 113, 5 days, 5 fights. Oh no.
What?
5 fights. This doesn't sound good.
You're talking about our last week.
Yes,
So you're talking about us.
that's right.
We were fighting this last week.
Yes, we were. And look at us today. So much better.
At least that's what you think. No, just kidding.
We thought this would be a really good time to let you guys have a peek into our real life. And that's one of the things we wanted to do with this podcast is to also show that even though we're life coaches and we have the skills, human nature kicks in. And there are times where stress is high and we can't always call upon the thoughts that we would like to.
I can't stand when people are experts and they pretend like they don't have any problems.
It's true.
It bugs me so bad because I think the people that actually go through real life and admit their mistakes and their real life are the ones that can really help because they've been there and we're there a lot.
Yes.
Right? We are not perfect and we don't claim to be perfect and to have a perfect marriage. We have a wonderful marriage because we are dedicated to working through our challenges. And we've learned so much, and we've been trained in many ways to know certain things, but it doesn't mean that we do them all the time.
That's right. And so I think that for us, we wanted to give you a little peek into what our fights kind of looked like this last week, because from our perspective, we don't fight a ton. But for some reason, last week, it was like, okay, you guys don't fight a lot, so we're going to have this 1 week where you guys are going to fight more than you ever have in a short period of time. And we were like, what is happening right now? This never happens. And so it was just such an interesting experience, and it's been fun to like work through it and then come out on the other side and analyze it and observe and say, like, what happened and how did we work through it?
Yeah.
So we wanted to share that with you guys because I'm sure you guys get in fights with your spouse and this is just, it happens. And so we wanted to let you in on a little bit of what our week looked like last week.
If you don't get in any disagreements or, I don't know, fights, that's a pretty loaded word, right?
Yeah.
Because you can interpret that a lot of ways. I mean, obviously we weren't fist fighting. In our fights, we don't yell at each other. I don't think we've ever yelled at each other. There's certain things that we do and don't do. And if you yell at each other, then that's part of the way that you do that. But my dad taught me when I was learning how to ski. I was 8 years old, and my dad he's a great skier, and he knew a lot about skiing. He said, look, if you don't fall and you just are perfect and you just, ski and you never fall, then you're not learning and you're not trying hard enough. And I believe that that's true. I think that there are times when you just have to go through the down times because that is when you learn. And if you don't ever do that, then maybe you're being too timid or you're not testing the limits enough, or maybe you're not being as authentic as you should be, right? Maybe you're just going with the flow. And I don't think that's necessarily healthy. And so I think when we're all living our best us and we're trying to live the best way we can, I think that there is a lot to be said about that and a lot of benefit.
That's so true. So we're just going to dive right in. We're going to share, each of us are going to share some of our negative thoughts that kind of got us into these patterns where we became kind of angry at one another. And I also want to point out that there were no like real big negative circumstances in our lives that like were causing us to feel all this stress, right? It's just, it wasn't any of that. We didn't have like this crazy chaotic week. There weren't any like big events that went bad or anything like that. It was just our thoughts that really took us downhill. So do you want to start or do you want me to start?
You can start.
Okay. So I'm going to share one of the thoughts that came to my mind that took me down a negative road. And it just had to do with a phone call where I was talking to my mom. And after I got off the phone call, I could tell that Nick was kind of bugged. And instead of like using my better life coaching skills, I immediately had a negative thought about it. And it was, what a hypocrite. Like, he talks to his parents. Is there something wrong with me talking to my parents? Why would he be mad about that, right? Like, I just went down the rabbit hole. And so immediately I had some pretty negative thoughts and negative feelings about me talking on the phone and then looking at you and thinking, what a hypocrite. And so even though that one thought might not be that bad in and of itself, it led to like 20 other negative thoughts as well. It was like a package deal. And sometimes when we can get so reactive like that, we can really go down that rabbit hole, and we're going to find it so much harder to pull ourselves out of it. And that's kind of where I started to, I think, go down that hole, and I got deeper and deeper, and I wanted to use my thought work, and I just wasn't quite there yet. So that was my first negative thought. The second negative thought was probably right after that, a few minutes after, because I was very reactive. I was a hot mess.
Hold on a second. They need to know some context here, because this doesn't make any sense without context.
Okay.
I was bugged because it was like at 11 o'clock at night and going into the midnight hour. And I will tell my side of the story, but this is after like 3 days of me being upset with you. And then you decided on a day that we were trying to recover and halfway through the week to get on the phone with your mom at midnight.
Yeah.
So that's why I was bugged. So that gives a little context. It's not like, all of a sudden she's on the phone with her mom, so I'm mad. I mean, come on, give me some credit here.
I give you lots of credit.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure everyone understands.
Yes. So then after my brain was spinning, of course, I was just filled with all kinds of negative feelings and emotions. And because I was already so far down the rabbit hole, I wasn't doing my thought work.
Yeah.
And so then as we tried to get into a discussion about it, you were actually trying to explain why you were upset by that. And it made sense to me. It actually made a lot of sense to me. But because I hadn't done my own thought work, I wasn't able to get to that place. And so as you were going through your explanation, I was going through the process of trying to interpret it in a positive way, but then my own brain still sabotaged me and went for the negative. And the thought that kept coming so strongly to my mind during your explanation was, I can't believe he thinks these things about me. Like I put myself in the place of like a victim. I was taking all the things that you were saying, whether they were true or not, or just you expressing, and I was like, I'm the victim here. Look at all these things that he thinks about me. Like, I can't believe it. Doesn't he totally know me? Like, I'm such a good person. How could he think this? And so I really felt so much like a victim and so wronged, right? We can feel so wronged and so accused. And so that just took me even further, that I was like, oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. Whenever you hear Shellie say, oh my gosh, you know something's wrong.
Yes. So those were the two like main thoughts that kind of just sent me down a bad path. And I mean, they're not like that bad. It's not like I thought you were this crazy monster. Like if you look at those two thoughts, they're not the worst thoughts, but they really can trigger us to like take things to a level that they really don't need to go to.
Well, they might think I'm a crazy monster after they hear my side.
Maybe. No, I doubt it.
We'll see.
Okay, so those are my two negative thoughts that kind of made it harder for me to like get back to that place of like, hey, I'm ready to work this out. It was these two thoughts that really put me in that spot where I felt stuck and I felt like it was hard for me to get back to my higher thinking brain. And I knew I needed to do thought work and I just couldn't get to it yet.
Okay, so to my negative thoughts, and this goes back probably a few days before that phone call moment, but just to give you all some perspective on maybe what your husband goes through sometimes, because I think this happens to us so fast. We can be in a really, really good place with our spouse, and then all of a sudden we feel hurt by them for some reason, and usually it's because we assume something. Okay, so my negative thoughts started when I assumed that you didn't care about some things that I was going through.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because last week we talked about depression.
Yeah.
And we talked about like all the signs of depression. And the next day, it's really weird that this happened. And maybe we can get into this a little bit later as to why this last week was very special. And I'll just say it now. I won't make you wait. So our son, Colson, went through the temple and received his blessings in the temple this week. And he's preparing to go on a mission. He's going to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And so this was the week where he went through the temple. And so we were preparing for that. And usually I found that whenever something good's happening, there's often opposition. And so it's almost like you can expect things to be weird and hard when something like that is going to happen.
Yeah.
So, you know, whether that's the devil or whether that's us sabotaging it ourselves, I don't know. I'm not saying that I have the answer to that, but whenever there's something really good happening, usually there's an opposition, and that's life.
Yeah.
And I think all of us can understand that. There is opposition in life. There's really good things that happen and really bad things. Like there's drama at weddings, right? There's drama at funerals when things should be like, you know, really somber and peaceful. A lot of times there's emotions that just come out. And then when there's those really good events, usually there's drama. That just happens. And so I think that's part of it. So the day after our last podcast, I woke up the next day feeling like all of those signs of depression. It was really weird. Like I felt these feelings of hopelessness, and I felt these feelings of feeling unworthy and feeling like I wasn't going to be able to accomplish the things I needed to accomplish. I felt overwhelmed. I realized that I haven't felt a desire to play music lately. And that kind of hit me too. It was weird. Like all of a sudden, and it's probably because we talked about it the day before, but all of a sudden my subconscious like kind of came out and just flooded me with all these feelings. And so I felt down, and I told you I felt down. And you were sympathetic. It wasn't like you were like, oh, whatever, get over it. You were sympathetic. But I think because I was in that place, I wasn't in the healthiest state of mind. I was vulnerable to some negative thoughts. And so I had these assumptions, and this is normal even when I'm not depressed, is to assume that you should respond a certain way.
Yeah.
So I had the thought that, oh, well, she's being sympathetic, but if she was really sympathetic and she really cared, she would be doing these things also and really paying attention to me and really trying to help me. But you had things to do, right?
Yeah.
So just to give some context, it kind of started with that. And again, it's that opposition. I knew there was this great event coming up in a couple days, and maybe that was part of it. But it started off on Monday with me feeling these feelings. I think I had every single sign except for the last one, which we talked about, like having a plan and wanting to end your life. Like I didn't have that one.
Yeah.
But I think I had all the others.
Yeah.
And then because I had these expectations of you to, you know, really show the empathy and compassion toward me, it was just kind of a chain reaction. And so the next day, I think I felt like, okay, so she didn't do the things that I wanted her to do. So the next day I wasn't depressed, I was upset.
Yeah.
And I thought, doesn't she know like how good she has it with me?
I think that is a really important thought, because I think a lot of men could think that. And I think a lot of women could think that. So I think that is a very authentic thought.
Doesn't she know how blessed she is to have me as a husband who's faithful to her and who would do anything for her? And here she is not really paying attention to my needs right now. And I think you knew that it was serious. It wasn't like I was just like down. I was really feeling down and all these other signs. And I'm thinking, well, we just went through a podcast where you walk through all these things and these are the ways that we overcome them. And you're not doing the things that you said you're going to do. What a bitch. Sorry, but that crossed my mind too.
That was a thought.
Yeah, but I mean, look, I don't, again, you guys have all heard me swear a few times here and there on this podcast, but I'm going to be real honest. I have those thoughts.
Yeah.
Cold-hearted, ungrateful, bitch.
Yes.
Now, do I believe those things? No, but those are thoughts that crossed my mind, and so they didn't help me.
Right.
They didn't help my thoughts, and I dwelt on those things, and I dwelt really on myself more than you. It was a pity party in my mind. It was, she should be more grateful for me and help me right now so that I can get back to that being that person that is so awesome for you.
Yeah.
And so I was being very selfish. And I think that's what happens when we go to those thoughts too. Doesn't she know how lucky she is? Right? Who's that thought all about? It's about me, right? It's not really about you. It's about me and trying to justify these feelings that I'm having. Another thought that I had was, she cares more about the kids than me. Because obviously we have 5 children and we both have responsibilities there. But I think it was the next day or the day after, or maybe it was the day before we went to the temple with our son. You were spending a lot of time with our 2 youngest. And that's great. They need their mom and they need their dad too. But again, I was like, why isn't she trying to make up with me? Why isn't she focusing on trying to heal us? And we both know that our marriage comes before our kids.
Yes.
Right? It does, and it should. Like, there is an order in life. And so, of course, my thought was, well, she's a hypocrite too, because she's not practicing what she preaches. And she's focusing more on our children when we're having a hard time and we're in the middle of these fights. Now, I think this gets us to fight 2 or 3. And this really, we say 5 days, 5 fights. This really is one big.
It was like multiple things just kept adding because it hadn't been resolved yet.
It kept adding up because you just wouldn't do the right thing.
That's right.
So anyway, and then this all leads up to the night where you had the phone call with your mom. Now, this is interesting because we had started to come out of this, and we had started making up.
Yeah.
And then that day we were starting to become connected again. And I think I had apologized and you had apologized, and we were on our way back to being, balanced again and feeling connected. And then I was waiting for you to come spend some time with me. Right? I didn't know if we were going to be intimate or not, but I was hoping we would, because usually, when you're making up, for at least for me, I like to have intimate time. And that doesn't necessarily mean sex, but I wanted to have intimate time with you where it was just us.
Yeah.
And not the kids. Because, that's kind of 8 o'clock, 8:30 on a school night rolls around. And I'm like, I want the kids to go to bed, and I get my wife to me. And that's me time with you. It's us time. And then all of a sudden, I hear you on the phone, and it's like 10 o'clock. And I'm like, okay, you don't talk to your mom that much. And when you do, I usually am like, okay, have that call. I know it's going to be like a 3-hour long call, right? Because you need that.
Yeah.
And your mom needs it. And I'm usually very giving of you at that time. I want you to have that time. And not that I control you at all, right? You do whatever you want with your time, but I was hoping that you would be quick and want to get back to me. And you didn't.
No.
And I was pissed.
I was not quick.
I was like, are you kidding me? After all that, after the last 3 days, after the great half of the day that we had just now, and then all of a sudden it's like, nope, my mom's more important than you. And I know that's not true, right? I know that she's not more important to you than me. I mean, you love your mother. I love my mother, but you come way before my mom, and I come way before your mom or dad or whatever. And so I was pretty upset. And so the thought I had was, well, she's a liar. Because everything she said earlier today and us making up, she's now a liar because she was leading me on to believe that we were going to be able to continue making up. But now all of a sudden she proved to me that I'm not her priority.
Yeah.
So anyway, that takes us to that call, and maybe you take it from here.
Well, I mean, I think we've laid the groundwork, you know, because after that night, it was still a few more nights or a few more days where things just kept contributing, right? It's like we would attempt to get back to it, and we'd have good attempts, and we'd start to reconnect, and then something would just kind of step in and sabotage it because we hadn't fully been able to like really sit down and talk through it. And so we were still kind of bubbling at the surface, but knowing we were trying to work through it. But then just that one little thing would kind of set us back off. That for sure was happening for me.
Well, it's interesting that the day that we went to the temple with Colson was a wonderful day.
Yeah.
It was wonderful. And even with that wonderful day, and it was like, again, it was kind of like we're back on track. Here we go. We're back on track. We're going to, make up, and we can put this behind us. And that evening, something else happened. I can't even remember what it was. But again, it was me thinking, cold-hearted, what's her deal? We just had a wonderful day with our son. And you were focusing on something else. Maybe it was, work or something. I can't remember what it was. But I went to bed that night also feeling rejected and abandoned. And I think those are the words really that ultimately is the theme, as I felt like you abandoned me throughout this whole week.
Yeah.
And in your mind, you're like, I'm not abandoning you. I'm just doing what I need to do. And I understand that. And we can talk about the good thoughts that helped us get out of that. But I felt abandoned, and I felt like there were multiple times when I felt like things were getting better, and then they just get worse.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, when we were talking through it and you had said abandon, I remember being like very surprised, like abandon, like that's a word I never would have thought that you would think that and feel that,
It's
I remember
a pretty dramatic word.
I just remember being so surprised and just shocked by that. And that word really stood out to me as I, tried to work through all this stuff and do my thought work. So yeah, it's very interesting how things just it was like more thorns, right? It's like you're trying to get through this beautiful garden and get to the beautiful flowers, and it's like you just keep coming across all these thorns that keep pricking you, and you're like, not again. And so it can add to the frustration. So what we want to do now is just talk about the flip side and say, you know what, like these are the natural negative thoughts that we went through. And we want to talk about like some of the key thoughts that pulled us out of it, that allowed us to feel better about one another, feel better about ourselves, and actually take maybe those actions so that we did finally reconnect in a positive way and talk through things, with clear thoughts and not all these negative thoughts. So I'll start with mine. One of the first times I started to feel better about this situation was when I actually was like, okay, let's try and do some thought work. Let's try and make some improvement. And I was reflecting on some of the things that you had said. And I remember specifically this thought. It goes like this: those are just his thoughts of the day. It doesn't make them true. And so for me, it was really recognizing like, hey, he's not in the best place right now. He's expressed that to me. And so sometimes when we're in a state like that, it's hard to get to that higher brain and like really say, I need to work on my thoughts right now. And so that helped me start to feel a lot of relief and call upon our years of history in marriage. I'm like, look at all these other wonderful things that he has expressed about us and our relationship. And I started to feel that relief and not so much, all those negative feelings. So for me, it was really good to be able to say that sometimes our spouse may say things in the moment, right? Because those are the reactions. And we can be able to put some space and distance and say, that makes a lot of sense that he's going to think and say some negative things during this time. And that we can give each other that room to do that. I knew you were not in the best place. And so me putting that thought back into my brain that in a week from now, he's not going to be thinking these negative things. That gave me a lot of peace and comfort to be able to start to climb my way back out of the rabbit hole. So that was the first one. The second one was he's suffering. That one was really important to me to kind of help me get out of my own victim mentality and making it about, me, the negative things you were saying about me, and to actually look at like your experience and what you were going through. And when I could just think like, he is suffering, this is not easy for him. Like, this is real. I could feel my negative emotions again decrease. And I started to feel way more compassion towards you. And I was like, okay, there are some things that I did not think correctly. And it was pretty negative. And yeah, Shellie, like I could have approached things way differently. I felt so much more compassion for what you were going through and not continuing to view just myself as, a victim of what you were saying about your experience. And so as I started to feel more compassion towards you, I found that my actions towards you were way more loving. I wanted to actually just like comfort you, even if I didn't have all the right words in the moment, and just let you know that, hey, I'm here, even though we're not in the best place yet. And so for me, that was huge. I don't naturally always do that, but that emotion of compassion really just inspired that type of connection. So my third thought that really helped me out of it was he can't see his way out of this just yet. And I really love this thought because it added to the compassion that I felt for you and the love that I felt for you. And I knew that your thoughts were negative towards me, and I was okay for that. I was okay with that at that moment because I knew and I had confidence that they would be temporary. And I was like, you know what? It's okay that he has these negative thoughts. They're just negative thoughts. And as he works through his thoughts, he's going to feel better. He's going to come out of it. I'm going to come out of it. And we're going to be able to come together in this wonderful space and then talk through things when we're both in our higher brain instead of, all this other negativity. But I liked that because it's okay to view things as negative and give them that parameter, like a tag, like this is temporary. Mm-hmm. And it's okay that it's negative right now. I know what's on the other side. I know that we'll work through it. I know that we'll talk through it. And right now, in this moment, it's negative. We're just not there yet, but it's coming. And that gave me so much hope and a feeling of encouragement, just keep going because the turnaround is right there, just right at the door. And I didn't know how long that was going to take. I had no idea. And I knew that you didn't know. And I was okay with that. I just knew it was coming. So those are the 3 thoughts that really helped me be able to kind of get back to the higher brain, thinking more maturely and logically, and not so much self-centered, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think those are all wonderful things, and I'm grateful for that, because oftentimes I think when people have hard times, they might last, months or years.
Yeah.
And because you have the ability to do that thought work, this was days or a week. And I just think that that is a miracle to be able to resolve something that isn't a huge deal, right? There's other things that are much bigger deals as far as what couples argue about.
Yeah.
Right? There are things that are bigger deals, or they start bigger. And one of us would choose something that would really hurt the other. And that wasn't the case necessarily. And so this is an example of how things can go bad in any circumstance, right? We can just have a bad day, and then there's a chain reaction.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably more what happens here. But this applies when something bad happens as well.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's what forgiveness is all about. And marriage is all about compassion and forgiveness and trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And also, which this is what helps me and what has helped me, to ask the question, how am I the problem here? And I had to really reflect, right? And so this was yesterday when I had the full sincere ability to answer that question. And I think that's kind of where we got yesterday is, okay, we're past that week.
Yeah.
And for me to really say, okay, I'm blaming her for things that she's doing that I don't think she should be doing, and she's not doing the things I expected her to do, and she's abandoning me, and it was really very selfish. And even though there probably was some truth to that, and there probably was some truth because you have just admitted that you had negative thoughts too.
Yeah.
So you had dirty hands as well.
Yes.
Right? Neither of us had perfectly clean hands.
Right.
But the thing that we can do is going from the blame of the other person to really doing something about how we see that person, is to ask ourselves, how am I a problem in this situation? And I was able to go from kind of feeling like justified in my anger and kind of having that, I'm just going to stay in this place and just be mad, and I'm going to feel justified in being mad at her, to how am I a problem and how am I causing this problem? And part of it is justifying my actions and saying, look, I'm a problem right now because I might not even have a desire to fix it at this point.
Yeah.
And when you realize something like that, where you're like, I don't even want to fix it at this point because I'm so mad and I'm so hurt that I just want to stay in that place because I'm justified in those negative feelings. And so the thought I had was, I started this whole thing, right, by choosing to get offended or hurt by her not acting the way that I wanted you to act, and realizing that you have agency and you do love me and you were doing what you could in the moment, and putting myself in your shoes and realizing that I was almost looking for reasons to get upset.
Hmm.
And so when I realized that, and I realized, okay, these 5 days of fighting didn't have to happen if I would have made better choices at the beginning and not to think about things in terms of what my needs were, right? It gets back to being selfish or selfless.
Mm-hmm.
And living in a state of selflessness is difficult, especially when you wake up depressed.
Yeah.
Right? So we're going to have these bad days, and things are going to happen. But to be able to have those thoughts and to get out of this rut that we were in for the last week was it was miraculous, because once I was able to do that and I went out and I said, okay, let's sit down and talk about it. And now that we can really get into the nitty-gritty of what happened, I was able to listen to you and you're able to listen to me, and we resolved it.
Yeah.
But it took me 5 days to get there. But the lesson here is, okay, I'm grateful it only took 5 days and it wasn't a week or a month or a year, because these are the kinds of things that lead to divorce if you can't fix them, right? If you can't resolve them. And so the positive thoughts that I had were realizing that my hands were not clean and I was to blame for much of what was happening, even though I was blaming you for the last 4 or 5 days. And then the other thought I have was, there's nothing more, nothing brings me more joy than being connected to you.
I like that thought. That's really beautiful.
That is the most joy that I have, is feeling connected to you. And when we're connected, that's when I'm the happiest. And so at that point, once I realized that I was not innocent and that what I really wanted wasn't to be mad at you, but to be connected to you, then I was able to and get past all of it and forgive you for all of your wrongs.
Yes, the list. I'm so grateful you can forgive me for that list.
Yeah.
It's so important. As we get to the end of this podcast, I just want to pull out a couple key points with everything that we've talked about. And the first one is that it's just so normal to go through this, right? When you're learning skills, you're learning about thought work, there's going to be backslides all the time. Even with us knowing all the skills that we know, that's why this podcast was so important. You know, just human nature takes over. If you're lacking sleep, like it's harder to think in the higher brain, or if you're depressed, it's harder to get back there. And so it's just very normal to go through these things, even when they're not about big, huge things. You can see from what we've talked about, small things can spin out of control super quickly. I also want to just talk about and point out that we need to give each other a lot of space. In life coaching, this is called holding the space. That means you hold this space in your heart for your spouse to say, they're growing through this right now. And I need to let them do it in their own way and at their own pace. A lot of times when we're uncomfortable, we want our spouse to resolve things on our timetable and at our pace so that we feel better. And holding the space means, hey, I recognize that you are your own person and how you're going through it is unique to you. And it's not the same how I would go through it. And so I'm going to give you that time and space to work through it. And I'm still going to love you through it. That is so important. We really need to do that for our spouse.
Yeah.
And finally, the last two things is that having a thought of being truly committed to your spouse, the relationship, the marriage, can sometimes really help you get to those higher thoughts. I love how you were saying, like, feeling committed is the best, right? Because feeling that connection, it's so key. And I think that's what we want so badly, is to feel that connection, not realizing that some of the things that we're doing sabotage that connection. We go against the thing that we actually want the most. But when we can have in our mind that our relationships and that commitment to one another and the concept of marriage, man, that can really help us when we're kind of spiraling. And the last thing I wanted to point out was, as you're working on this, the ups and the downs, the positive results and the negative, as you keep applying these concepts in thought work, please have confidence that your challenges and your issues, they will start to resolve themselves quicker. And something that may have taken like 3 weeks to solve and actually get through can resolve in much shorter time. And so all those negative emotions that linger and drag on that you wish weren't happening because they affect all the other aspects of life negatively, you can lessen that. And that is the beauty. We're so grateful that even though it was a crazy and intense 5 days of like not totally getting along, We're grateful that it was only 5 days and not like 5 weeks of that.
Right.
And so just know that as you work on your own thoughts and really challenge them and try to get to that higher thinking, that you can lessen all those negative emotions and they don't have to linger around as long. Okay, any final thoughts?
Nope, I've said enough.
Okay, well, we hope that this next week you will pay attention to any lingering negative thoughts you may be holding on to towards your spouse, and maybe try some of these positive ones on that we've discussed and see if they bring you any sense of relief and comfort.
I do have one thing to say.
Okay.
We do have to choose positive thoughts.
Yeah.
Negative thoughts happen to us.
Yes.
When we realize that we have to choose to change our thinking, that's when things can really happen. And that's where the magic happens. That's where healing happens. When we choose to forgive and to think differently, and those are actions that we have to take.
Yeah.
Those don't come as naturally as the negatives.
No, they don't. So just keep those in mind this next week and see if you can really challenge yourself to maybe choose some of those other thoughts on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you restore it with your spouse. Thank you so much for listening today, and we hope you will join us again next week.